querida, tudo bem?
Tudo ótimo.
Primeiro de muitos.
Que bom. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much, Andy, for accepting this invitation to be with us today. It's always a great pleasure for me to be with you. Andy and I met at Schumacher College 2 years ago or so, and we had the chance of collaborating a lot on the holistic science masters there for 1 year. And since then, Andy's a very good friend and an inspiration. So we were just chatting before we started that. So Andy he's currently at Schumacher, and he's leading the holistic science master's program and a new program that he's creating that I asked him to talk a little bit in the end of the session today, called Engaged Ecology. He's a musician, an academic, a teacher, and what else am I forgetting? And
father.
A father and a great friend. So the idea for today is, and so we were talking, Andy he's going to give a brief introduction for around 20 minutes or so. And then as we are a small group, we would like to make it a conversation. So you're invited to bring comments or reflections or questions that you have for Andy. And if you're not comfortable speaking in English, you can also write the question in Portuguese, and we can all try to translate it and to make it accessible to everyone. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to Andy.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm very aware from what I read in the news and from conversations with my Brazilian friends, not least Bia, that things are really tough in Brazil at the moment. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that, really. I know things are tough, and you are in our thoughts and our prayers. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is I'm so sorry. I'm so typically English. I speak English, and I forget that other people, it's not their first language. So if I go too quickly, or if I use words that you don't understand, well, at Schumacher we do this thing. It's meant to be an L. I'm told that in North America that means loser. At Schumacher it means language. So just do that, and I will stop and try and use words that everyone can understand. But I'm going to be talking today about animism, and maybe we could start with for those with their videos on, a show of hands. Who has at least heard the word? Is it a familiar word or an unfamiliar word? Who knows the word? A few people. Okay, not so much. Okay. Well, I was thinking about how to come at this. And one of the kind of tropes, if you like, that people have been saying throughout the pandemic, throughout lockdown here in Britain, people have been saying that connection with nature is very important for our health, for our physical health and our mental health. And who can argue with this? It's just absolutely clear that when people are locked up in their rooms, in their flats, and they have no access to a garden or to a park or wilder spaces, that their physical and their mental health suffers. This is not in question. But I want to question, in my discussion of animism, I want to question somewhere this whole idea about connection and disconnection from nature. I'm going on holiday in 10 days' time to a beautiful part of Britain called Wales. It's got mountains and rain. It's got lots and lots of rain. And so I bought this book, The Wild Guide to Wales, dun, 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 and it's full of dramatic pictures. I don't know if you can see that. It's what I'm going for, but mostly they're pictures of people doing things. I can't find one. I thought I would just read what it says on the back. Discover secret sandy beaches lapped by turquoise seas and dramatic limestone cliffs honeycombed with sea caves. Watch the sunrise from inside an ancient cromlech. A cromlech is a prehistoric burial mound. So from the Neolithic. So go and watch the sunrise from an ancient burial mound. Conquer ruined castles and snow-covered peaks. Wander through enchanted woods and dive into crystal clear waterfalls. Descend into tunnels and caverns. I mean, this is sounding so good, isn't it? Or swim in a pure mountain tarn, overflowing with legend. Wow, this is so good. What could possibly be problematic about this? Well, what I want to suggest is that however well-intentioned all of this is, this idea of going out into nature and jumping into the sea or jumping under a waterfall or climbing a mountain, somewhere it's coming from a worldview that is anything but animistic. It is a worldview that says nature, the natural world, the other than human, is my playground. I can just go and swim in this lake. I can go and climb that mountain. I can go and get my paddleboard and go out to sea. Let me tell you another story. I was down on the beach about a month ago. First time I'd seen my mother, my elderly mother, since lockdown began. And we chose somewhere where we could socially distance, and we went to the beach near her. And it was a very windy day, and the wind was blowing onshore. And because it was a windy day, lots of people were out on their sailboards. You all know what I mean by a sailboard or a windsurfer, like a surfboard with a sail on it. And it was really hard for people to launch. And the cool guys were launching, off they went. But there was this one guy and he just could not get onto his board. And it required that he got his feet onto the board and let the wind pull him up before the waves came in and knocked him off. Really difficult. And he kept trying and he kept trying, and he got knocked underwater, and he came out and he had a rest for about 20 minutes and was clearly getting really angry and frustrated and embarrassed. And then he tried again. And on the beach, we have these things called groins, which is not the same word as that which lies between our legs. Groins are these wooden fences that stick out into the sea, and they're put there to try and stop the sand drifting. He got knocked by a wave, his sail got caught on the groin and it got ripped, boom, all over. He wasn't going sailing that day. It was a mistake. We looked it up afterwards when we got home. It was a mistake that was going to cost him 400 quid. Now, I'm sure he went home feeling embarrassed, cross, frustrated, wishing he were a better windsurfer. But what he didn't, I would imagine, go home thinking was, I could have been a better animist. And we were discussing this, my wife and I, afterwards, and saying that in an animistic culture, what one might do, if you can't get into the sea, maybe the sea doesn't want you today. Maybe something is not in step. Maybe you are out of step with the ocean, and the ocean is not letting you in. And for this guy, it took him ripping his sail for him to get the message. So in an animistic culture, everything has agency. Everything is seen as having agency. And therefore, the important thing about an animistic worldview is that you negotiate with these agents. So I don't know. We don't live in an animistic culture here in England. We are a colonial culture with a colonial, Western, rational, materialist, scientific worldview, where the sea is just the sea, and I can do what I like on the sea. I can go sailing. It's up to me if I go sailing or not. It would never occur to us to ask permission to enter the water. What would be the correct etiquette, the correct way of relating with the sea? Do I have to make an offering? Do I have to say a prayer? Do I have to do some kind of divination to see whether the sea will accept me today, or what I need to do? But in animistic cultures, this is exactly what you would do. You would never presume that you can do anything without some kind of negotiation with the agents, or the what we would call the other than human people who populate the world. So the word animism has I guess a kind of problematic history, in that it was invented in 1879 by a British scholar, one of the founders of the discipline of anthropology, called Edward Burnett Tyler, and I can give you his name in the chat later if you want to follow him up. And he wrote this great two-volume book called Primitive Culture, a clue in the title to how he viewed other than Western cultures. Primitive culture, they're primitives, they're not civilized. And for him, animism was originally a theory of religion. For him, he was an atheist, and religion needed explanation. And he came up with a theory of animism, which was in fact a theory of how all religion began. If you're interested, I can go into the details of that, but I'd rather not right now. The point was that for him, animism was what we would call a category mistake, a mistake of categories. So for Tyler, primitive people aren't stupid, they're intellectual, they are reasoning people, but they ended up with they started with the wrong axioms, the wrong starting points, and they ended up with wrong conclusions. So it's an intellectual exercise that leads them to animism, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons. And animism, he thought, was the category error of believing that inanimate objects possess souls. So rocks and trees and mountains and rivers and the sea, for him, in primitive culture and in animistic culture, an animistic culture would see them as wrongly being alive in some sense, as possessing souls. Soul is an animating spirit. Soul is the thing that moves it. And for that reason, animism was given very little scholarly attention, really until the 1990s, by an Israeli scholar, an Israeli anthropologist called Nurit Bird-David. And she started to revisit the work of an earlier anthropologist called Irving Hallowell, an American anthropologist who was writing in the 1950s, from the 30s to the 60s, actually. And Hallowell did his research amongst what were then called the Ojibwe people, who exist around the Great Lakes area in North America, Turtle Island. And it's Hallowell who led to this rethink of what animism is. And in the Ojibwe language, okay, in Romance languages, I'm sure it's true of Portuguese, you are forced by grammar to give every object a gender. Correct? Is that right, Bia? Yeah. So what gender would a book be? Is it masculine or feminine?
Masculine, of course.
Well, we lost all that thanks to the Normans, who couldn't be bothered to learn Anglo-Saxon with all its inflections. So we lost all that. So it's very strange to me, the idea that objects have genders. Well, in the Ojibwe language, you are forced by grammar to say whether an object is animate or inanimate, alive or not alive. Wow, that's amazing. Can you get your heads around that? So this is a masculine book in Portuguese. It is masculine, it has a gender. But if the Ojibwe had books, they would be forced by grammar to say whether this is animate or inanimate. Wow, that's really interesting. So Hallowell, this is how the story goes. Hallowell was there with an unnamed old man, and they were in a dry riverbed full of rocks. And Hallowell said to the old man, he said, "Are all these rocks about us alive?" Because by grammar, in the Ojibwe language, all rocks should be animate. Are all these rocks around us alive? What do you think the answer was? No, but some are. Well, hold on a minute. Grammatically, they all should be alive. What do you mean, no, but some are? Well, it turns out that the ones that were animate were obviously the ones that move by themselves and talk. Okay. Well, how do you get your head around that? Aha, well, in Western cultures, and I assume it is the same in Brazil, we have a sense that where we are now is reality. And when we go to sleep, we dream, and that's not really real. It might have importance if you are a Jungian or a Freudian or undergoing any kind of therapy, or whether you're someone who pays attention to your dreams. But for most of us, consensus reality is waking reality. Well, in Ojibwe culture, it's the other way around. So dreams are more real than this. And Hallowell concluded that rocks move and speak mostly, but not always, in the dream reality. Anyway, I'm in danger of digressing. The point is that Hallowell, borrowing from Ojibwe culture, came up with this idea of other than human people. So this new understanding of animism, which comes from Hallowell through Nurit Bird David, is that the world is full of people, only some of whom are human. This doesn't mean that rocks are sort of humans but not quite as good, or trees are humans but not quite as good. It means a rock is a rock person. It does what rocks do. It rocks. A tree is a tree person. It does what tree people do. It trees. It's treeing. A mountain does what mountain people do. It mountains. A hedgehog or an echidna or a porcupine, they do what they do. And so in an animistic worldview, we are suddenly plunged into a world of relationality where it's about finding right relations with all the other than human people with whom we live. Now, does that mean we can't kill other than human people? Well, no, we have to kill plant people, and we have, for those of people who choose to eat meat, we have to kill animal people. Sometimes it's wholly appropriate to kill animal people. Sometimes it may be wholly appropriate for an animal other than human person to try and eat us. That's what they do. But what it means is that we have to think about what is the correct way of relating with all these other than human people. So it might mean that before I go sailing, I have to negotiate with the sea to say, can I come today? Is it okay? Or are you going to turf me out and break my boat? Might do. I think animism is it's subtle, but it's a very powerful way of seeing the world. One which challenges this dominant view of the West that the world is purely there for us to do with as we want. I can go and dig a mine in that mountain because it's full of gold, or it's full of uranium, or it's full of copper. I can go sailing whenever I want. I can go and, what was it? watch the sunrise from a cromlech or jump under a waterfall. Well, maybe I can't. Maybe there's some kind of negotiation that has to happen, a conversation at the very least. So I would like to call myself an animist. Maybe a better way of saying it would be, I am learning to be an animist. And as I say, it's a subtle idea, but a powerful idea, and one which allows us to learn from indigenous cultures and from pre-Christian European cultures, who I think people have always been animists. It's maybe a default position of humanity. We can relearn to be in the world, participate in the world, and negotiate with these other than human people. I said I would speak for 20 minutes. I've spoken for 22, so I'm going to stop there and let's turn it into a conversation. By all means, disagree or challenge or share stories, however you want to take this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Andy. It made me think of a story now that you mentioned, like if you have any stories of David Abram on his book, The Spell of the Senses, that he starts the book sharing this story of how he was doing this, I can't really remember, it's been a while I read, but he was in some part of Asia and he was living in this house and the house was being invaded by ants. And that the local people, that his reaction was, like they're eating the house, I don't know what to do. And then the local people came and they said, okay, no, we need to offer them, they're looking for food, so we need to offer them food. And they've made this ritual, and they started offering the ants a bowl of food, and it was put out of the house every day, and as the local offer, and the ants started to go to this bowl of food that they were offering and stopped going to the house. And the way that, so he talks about that on the book, about how he was struck by the way that the local people reacted to, oh yeah, of course you need to feed them, and because they're eating the house, and so you have to kind of enter this negotiation with them. And so they've done this little ritual, which I can't recall exactly what it was, and offered food, and then they stopped going into the house, which I found was brilliant. I just thought about that.
Well, that's a beautiful example, and I would imagine that the Western impulse would be to reach for ant killer and try and kill the ants and eradicate the problem, go away, rather than find a way of cohabiting, of living together. That is a beautiful example. We have there's a new poisonous spider in Britain called the false widow, which I think came from the Caribbean and arrived in Torquay just down the road in the 1970s, and thanks to climate change has set up home in Britain. And if you get bitten by it, it gets infected. It's horrible. Anyway, we have one living in our kitchen, and my poor wife is arachnophobic. She's terrified of spiders, and I'm like, well, it's not doing anything. She's just, I assume it's, I don't know what gender the spider is. I call her a she. I don't know why. This beautiful, scary spider is just in the corner of our kitchen, getting bigger and bigger. And I don't really want to remove this spider. I want to try and live with the spider, unless it bites my children, and then it. Hita had, oh, someone had, yes.
No, Hita, I think, has a question first.
Yes, I would like to comment, because the example of if I have to ask the ocean if I can go with my boat, I need to have been trained to how to listen his answer. I need to understand what does it mean, because it's not meaningful if I ask and I don't know how to listen the answer. So it's a whole learning. It's our school. And this week I was in the forest, and I was in a cabin. Is it the word via
A
cabin?
little hut, right? Yeah,
A little
cabin.
hut, yeah, very permeable, very, high permeability with the outside. And I was wondering that even if I don't know how to listen, it was very strongly influenced from the outside to inside, inside, outside. It was a very intense flow of a relationship that influences our way of standing and doing things and sleeping and dreaming. It's a very high influence. So I'm just putting ideas because when we cut the forest and build a house, we are already seeing that the forest has nothing to say to me, and I prefer to go free of all these leaves and the rain and humidity and the spiders, and I cleaned the place to build my house. And when you don't do that, there is something that happens. My question is that necessary to be inside a very limited culture, way of thinking, cosmovision, or is it something that could be really expressing naturally from our human animal soul? Do you understand my English?
I think so. I want to start by saying I loved what you're saying about learning to listen, and that's absolutely essential and vital. And of course, traditional cultures have developed ways to listen, and so yes, that's an essential part of it. So, if I'm correct, you were asking whether this is something innate in us or whether it has to be something learned. Is that correct?
Yes, it's exploration.
Well, I think both. And I'm starting to think that the human self, certainly in the West, our view of the self is incorrect, it is inaccurate. That in Western European cultures, we think of ourselves as like a hard ball, that there's a singular me here, and I have a defined edge, and I kind of bounce around, and I find a partner and we kind of join together and we have a family, but ultimately the building block of society is the individual, this hard ball. And I'm not convinced that there is just me in here, and nor am I convinced that I am impermeable. And I think there are techniques we can develop that make us pervious, that make us permeable again, but that modernity is very good at building that armor. So I think it can be learned, and I think it's partly learning to listen, and it's partly learning to make ourselves pervious, make ourselves porous, rather like your cabin. I think your cabin is a beautiful metaphor for the self, that there may be all sorts of people living in here, and the wind can get in and out through the holes, and the rain can get in. I think that's a much better metaphor for the self. To give you an example of why I think it can be learned, well, actually, no, yeah. Okay, sorry, too many thoughts in my head. I have a friend who, when his son was young, they used to call him a toad catcher. You all know what I mean by a toad? Bia, do you want to, you know what I mean by a toad? A kind, like a frog, but not a frog, a toad. How would you say in Portuguese?
But isn't it the same as a frog, or is it, how is it different?
They're
Huh?
different. They belong in different biological
Fala de novo,
families.
Paula.
Anyway, doesn't matter. A
Eu
frog
acho que é
will
uma
do.
rã.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it's a different kind of frog.
This 9-year-old boy could just, they used to call him the toad catcher because he would walk into a field, he would just walk to a stone, turn it over, and there would be a toad. They're difficult to find. You don't see them often. And I think I'm amongst friends. I have a particular relationship with a certain kind of mushroom that grows here in the autumn months. And I just know where they are because I've been picking them and consuming them for a long time. I can be out for a walk and I'll just stop and I'll look, and 20 meters that way is a mushroom, tiny little mushroom like that. And it's somehow in me. So it's in the cabin of myself, there are mushrooms growing, and there are other species too, ravens. I always know when there are ravens about. I think it's something innate because my friend's son had that, but I think we also have to learn it because we have to start building relationships with these other than human people. And once we've built that relationship, we've let them inside the cabin, and then there's something connecting. I'm talking too much. Lissandra had a question.
Thinking that children,
Okay.
I was thinking about children when you asked the question, Hita, because I think I was remembering the scene of this weekend. I was with my partner's nephew, and he came with this crocodile pet, and like to scare me. And I was like pretending that, oh my God, a crocodile in the kitchen, oh my God. And he was like, no, it's okay, it's not real. And then it made me think of, no, for them, they are still learning what is actually like, real in our sense of what reality is. So I think there's something also of them, they come with that on, I guess, of feeling that everything is alive, but then they are taught by us adults to say, this is not true, this is not alive. And so there's an aspect of it that I think we come to the world kind of raw. And then the way that we live, our cosmovision makes us see everything as dead. Anyway, Lisandra.
Yeah. No, and you say you use the word to negotiate with these other, let's say, beings. I do not know if I'm a bad negotiator. But I always feel like a dialogue, and most of the times they decide, not me. Like I'll give you 2 examples of this kind of experience I have had in my life that was so, this conversation was so vivid that once I was diving in Australia and this big Luna fish appeared just in front of me. I was in its place, so I mean you have to decide where to go, and I turned this way and he turned this way too. I turned that way, he turned and I just stopped and let him choose because I was in his environment, so this was really always impressed me because I was in its environment, and he decided the fish, not me. I was the human being who was supposed to decide, but I was completely, let's say, naked, out of even oxygen, with a limited amount of oxygen to breathe. So I do not know if because of this experience, it turned out to be so vivid that this dialogue, it really happens. And the other time I was in Hawaii and I was looking at the Kilauea. I could not go any further. I told my husband, please let's stop here because it's too big to me. It is too big. I cannot go any further. It's already enough this where we are. I mean, we've come too close to it. I cannot, its boundaries, like something like that. So for me, this, I don't know if I was listening, if I was negotiating, but it was a real dialogues, and I think they were deciding somehow. So my question to you is, how does these negotiations happen, or if it is the right verb to use, because language put us, well, I'm a lawyer, so negotiation for me means something already. I have some comprehension of the term. So what are other more animistic terms that we could use, to have a broader, vivid animist interaction?
Yeah, well, those are beautiful examples. Well, I mean, I want to say dialogue is maybe another alternative, but sometimes it can be a monologue. I'm thinking of the late ecofeminist philosopher Val Plumwood in Australia, she was out canoeing in a flooded area of the forest, and there were signs up saying, don't go in because when it's flooded, there are crocodiles, and she ignored it. And she got attacked by a crocodile, and the crocodile pulled her down into a death roll, and she managed to escape. And then it got her again, and she managed to escape. And I think it got her a third time, and she managed to escape. And somehow climbed up a tree, and then eventually got to safety. And she based her entire eco-philosophy on the idea that we are also prey species. And when you are being attacked by something like a crocodile, it's a one-way conversation. There's no mercy. There's no mammalian sense of empathy. You are simply food. But that's the nature of animism, and maybe that perspective changes our relationship with the other than human, because normally we're in the position of being the crocodile. We decide this animal is going to die, this plant is going to die, I'm going to chop this tree down. So right now, I can't think of a better word than negotiation. I think I understand what you're getting at, that negotiation is a bit like plea bargaining, well, I'll give you this if you give me that. And but if you look at traditional cultures, always there's some sense of, yes, we're taking something from the world, but we need therefore to give something back. And the giving back is often dance or ritual or offerings of something is given. My sleep, my comfort, my a portion of what I've grown or what I have it back. It's for you, because I'm not just taking. There's a reciprocity. Yes, I need to kill you because I need to eat, but we will dance for you all night, or whatever it is.
I think I got the answer. Some like how like compostage. You are giving also the food to the soil. I mean, you are nurturing the soil, so you eat, but you are also nurturing in this sense. So it's also giving.
Yes. And of course, animist cultures can be agricultural as well. They're not just hunter-gatherers. So Frederique Apfel-Marglan is another anthropologist who wrote a book called Subversive Spirituality. And she studied in particular animist cultures in Peru. and this very ancient tradition of making pots and breaking them in the fields when the seeds are sown as a gift back to the fields. So to go back to your initial question, Rita, I think if it isn't innate, then it's definitely something very ancient within humanity.
I have a question, because I think the question was before, and with what Lysandra brings about this doubt about the term negotiate, it comes more vivid to me, because sometimes it seems like the first idea of animism that you told us, that the objects have souls. So we come to think about it in a very human and anthropomorphic way, and I think it's pretty much the same with the word negotiate is very anthropomorphic. So it's what we have for using. You know, we need to use it because that's what we have. But sometimes it seems to make tricky because it brings a whole kind of repertoire that is very human and culturally associated with not with animism. So, but my question is, I don't know exactly, but how would you tell this difference? Because when we say, oh, there are people, but they are not humans, I think it's already a step towards, let's use the word people instead of so, and now let's give this sense to the word people, that it can be other than human, as the author you brought. But yeah, I just would like to listen more from you about that, how to not come in this trap of casting humanity into the world instead of maybe making us more the world, you know, like this inversion. Because I think Thinking God brings like that, about how we should actually, we have inverted things, and actually life is in the world and it's not inside us, so we don't have to cast it in things, but because everything is already alive. So I'd like to listen from you. It's not very clear, the question, but
no, I think I understand. Well, Nurit Bird-David, the Israeli anthropologist who's sort of largely responsible for this reimagining, and I should also mention Graham Harvey, who's one of the most prolific writers on animism. Bird-David doesn't like the term other than human people because it seems to privilege the human once again. The point of reference is the human. You're not human. You're something else. I do have a paper by her where she's criticizing this, but I've not yet read it, so I don't know what her preferred term is. David Abram, who Bia was mentioning earlier, uses the word the more than human, which is slightly different, has a slightly different connotation, different meaning. And some people don't like that because it seems to put everything on a hierarchy. I kind of like the word agents. And this comes from another body of theory, which I'm not going to go into now, but it's called actor network theory, which originates with the French scholar Bruno Latour, in which everything is flat and there are just agents in the world. And agents, this computer that I'm looking at is an agent. This pen is an agent. The chair I'm sitting on is an agent. The oxygen I'm breathing is an agent. Everything has agency. I kind of like that, because I think it kind of encompasses everything, and it certainly gets rid of the human being at the center. There was something else you said at the end which prompted a thought, and now I've forgotten what the thought was. Maybe it'll come back. Oh yes, about the aliveness of things. And so we have a mechanistic worldview, largely in the West, in that we tend to see the world as mechanistic. Not always, but a dominant worldview since Isaac Newton is of the clockwork mechanism. The universe is a kind of clockwork machine. I don't actually think it holds as much dominance in science as some of my esteemed colleagues would suggest. But in order to have a mechanistic view of the world, you have to have machines. And if you don't have machines, you cannot possibly see the world as mechanistic. You can only see the world as brimming with life. So it just seems obvious to me to see the world as radically and fundamentally alive and full of agency. That's not what needs explanation. What needs explanation is the view that you could see the world as being a machine. That's the pathology. That's the thing in need of explanation, that it just makes complete sense that the world is full of agents and is brimming with life. Everywhere you look, there's aliveness. So that was my final thought there.
Hi, can I talk?
Oh, okay, please.
Also, sorry. I work with communication, and that's a really nice thing to think about, that we always are concerned about the language, about the answer, about what the people can talk, and they use the words and the nature all the time to think about the human, what we feel about the things. But when, for me, when we talk about nature, about the things, we are talking about a sensitive experience, not necessarily an answer. When we talk, when we said, oh, today it's a good day to walk or to dive or for anything. So it's a challenge in my work, my job, trying to make the things are more sensitive than more in the language, concentration on language, because we are, it's a primitive way to talk about the language. I don't know if you understand my point of view, but it's something we have to learn again to reconnect with the source, with the things that we can see in that things. It's a spiritual experience that we're not learning in school or learning with our parents so much time, because we are just seeing the material world, and it's difficult to understand what is a wind means when we feel this.
Thank you. There was a lot of crackle on your line, so I'm not sure I totally heard everything. Were you questioning the use of the word nature? Was that part of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would agree. I really dislike the word nature, because it immediately presupposes that we're not part of nature, that this myth of human separation from nature. So I started by talking about this trope of nature connection being good for us. Well, I'd love to know in what sense we are not radically and fundamentally connected to nature. I mean, I always say to people, well, okay, if you could all just hold your breaths for 10 minutes, and if you're all still standing at the end of that, then I will be willing to concede that you are disconnected from nature. Or jump out of a first-story window and tell me that you are disconnected from nature. I mean, I'm being glib, but I am in a teeming ecosystem. My health depends on the organisms that call me home, in my gut, on my skin. Most of us have a species of mite that lives in the follicles of our eyelashes. That's what it calls home. We don't even know. Who knows what it does for us? So this myth that we're disconnected from nature, I think is unhelpful. But I think we can see it animistically, which is that we choose to keep very narrow company. We have increasingly restricted our world to the human world, and we pay no attention to the other agents with whom we share the world. We're like the people at a party, like myself, who retreat into a corner and don't want to talk to anyone. Terrible example, but that's my introversion coming out. Whereas what we're actually craving is meaningful connection, or meaningful, not connection, meaningful encounters with the agents with whom we share the world. And to do that, we have to step out of our world. We have to step out of the city and this homogenized human environment where we try and push out the other than human, where we kill ants rather than feeding ants, where we hoover up poisonous spiders from our kitchens rather than living with them, where we allow the cabin to have cracks. And then we can encounter the other agencies and encounter them on their own terms. So I'm not sure if that remotely answers your question, but that was my riff on what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you.
Marcelo, maybe one last, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious of time, but let's go for it.
Yeah, let me try to share with you my reflections. You know, when we try to understand, my question is to try a new way, to try to go back to maybe animistic thinking, dealing with the world. Maybe we should try to understand when exactly we became the way we are. When I mean we, I am meaning the whole world, even Asian people, even Latin people. We are all involved in a language that we could say it started from René Descartes. But I prefer to go, you know, much more back to the, you know, to the Middle Ages. And I feel this because when I remember that Germanic people with when Anglo-Saxon people like you, Andy, started dominating maybe Roman people, the Greek people in the past, they dominated with their power, the wars, you know, invading places. So they were very strong. But why these so strong people, so still animistic people were convinced, you know, to this, let's say, to this way of seeing life as a new truth, not the truth of negotiating with the nature, but the truth of, you know, believing in something out of the relation with the surrounding things, and something that, you know, would be the new agency way, let's say. So I think that much more of blaming only, you know, Descartes from considering everything as a machine that we can use, I think that this wrong, maybe we can say wrong way, started much more, you know, it's deeper than that. I think, and I would like to know why the Germanic people, so dominant still today, were the people being convinced, you know, to accept a new culture, maybe the Christianism, and to accept so easily. So nowadays we have neoliberalism, we have capitalism, everything so much, you know, close to the way of thinking, guided by, you know, abstract God that, you know, makes everything work and make us, you know, using through the language, make us being the leaders, the real agency people, the real people, you know, having the leadership, and so losing the animism. So when we, nowadays, when we mention animism, we mention the indigenous people, but we forget that everybody in Asia, in Europe, were animists, and something got different. And this is what I am looking for. Sorry for being so confusing, maybe.
No, it's such a great question, and I think it's helpful up to a point to try and work out where we went wrong. And there are strong contenders. One is the scientific revolution, as you've mentioned, with Descartes and Newton and all the rest, Francis Bacon. Another could be the Middle Ages, and certainly scholars have suggested that. Another might be the Roman Empire. I'm pretty certain that the Roman Empire in my land destroyed the last animistic culture that was flourishing here. It could be the beginning of agriculture, because people who grow food have to settle and they have to defend land, and owning land is important. And as I understand it, the latest archaeological evidence, there's huge debate in Britain about the birth of agriculture. When it arrived in Britain, was it a cultural idea or was it the movement of people? Well, the latest archaeological evidence seems to be it was a genuine movement of people. And for a while, the agriculturalists coexisted with the hunter-gatherers who already lived here, but eventually came to dominate. Or you could even go back further. Was it the invention of fire, way back in human history, which completely changed our relationship to the other than human world, because now we can eat all sorts of foods that we couldn't contemplate eating before, and we can defend ourselves and we can transform the environment. So it's helpful up to a point, and I think it's incredibly important. I've not really talked about decolonization, but I think what a strand that goes hand in hand with a discussion of animism is the need to decolonize, that somewhere all our problems are to do with colonization and a colonizing mindset. The worldview that says, I can do what I like with this mountain. I don't care what you people living here do with the mountain. It's mine now, and I'm going to dig it up because of its minerals. That to me is a colonizing worldview. So yes, it's important. But I also think we can't go back. There is no going back, in the sense that wherever it is we're going, you know, science is also really helpful. It's caused all this mess, but it's also really helpful. So for me, I'm not advocating going back. I kind of love to, because I'm a romantic, but I don't think we can. So somewhere my view of animism is a forward-looking animism that, if it were possible, combines the best of this archaic worldview with what modernity can offer at its best. I don't know whether that's possible, but it would be nice. But yeah.
Livia, would you like to say something? A last comment. I know we ran over time, but if you want to say something.
Thank you. It will be very fast. So when I hear about this separation between nature and human beings, what comes to mind is that it makes me think about consciousness and unconsciousness, in the way that when we deny what is, or when we don't get in contact with what is unconscious in our minds, in our lives, it comes back in another way. And I think that when we separate from nature and we deny it, and we deny that we are part of it, it also comes back. Like when we attack the forests, and the life comes back as a pandemic, like this pandemic that we're living right now, it's somehow associated with the pressure that the cities are doing in savages areas. And I think it makes me think about that. It's like we could integrate, like when we get in contact with what is unconscious in our minds, we can integrate it and make it conscious. We could do that with nature too, integrate with the nature. And I think that this is something that we could think of. I mean, I think that there's a parallel between the separation, nature and human beings, and unconsciousness and consciousness.
Thank you. And I don't know if you've come across the American post-Jungian writer James Hillman, but he makes exactly this point. I think in the book Pan and the Nightmare, but you can find his writings and countless talks online where he's saying that the denial of the wild and the denial of the unconscious are the same thing. Yeah, thank you.
Well.
What's the name of the author?
I'll just put it in the chat.
There was someone else you mentioned, I can't remember now who it was, that you said you would write down. It will come up.
Was the first anthropologist
Oh, okay.
who denied animism as a primitive view.
Okay, coming up. Oops, I spelled culture wrong. And I'd also recommend Graham Harvey's book. I think it's just called Animism. Also the Handbook of Contemporary Animism. Sadly, the Handbook of Contemporary Animism is very expensive, even here. So maybe you can find it illegally online, but don't tell him I said that. Well, he's got 50 quid to buy a book. I mean, I haven't. So.
Well, yeah, there's another conversation going on in Brazil of more taxes to books, but let's leave it. Let's not end with that. Thank you very much, Andy. It was great to reconnect to this conversation. And thank you everyone for joining and for the questions. And yes, I was going to invite, I don't know if that's what you're going to say, but to invite you to, if you want to briefly talk about the, these new masters, and also to tell everyone when you're meeting, because I know you're doing some open sessions to talk about them.
So yes, my main role here at Schumacher is been developing a new master's program called Engaged Ecology, which has just been validated, and it starts in January, and it's fully residential. So you would come here for 6 months, and we are going to be looking at exactly these themes that we've been talking about today: decolonization, animism, how we engage with the world about us. And we'll be, by doing various practices, everything starts with practice, and then we will reflect on the meaning of the practices and see how each way of engaging with the world allows certain ideas and precludes other ideas. I'm not making any sense now. Hold on a minute. I'm going to paste something in. I can find it. It's up here. 1 second. Oh dear, my computer's running very slowly. Too many things open. Here we go. Coming up in the chat. Boom. I shall read it out to you. Engaged Ecology is a radical new program for students looking to decolonize their thought, to reconsider their relationship with the more than human, and find solutions to the environmental and social crises of our time. The course equips you with the skills to engage practically in the field, while also allowing you the time and space to develop a personal understanding of the interconnected nature of the world and your place within it. So we are going to be talking about spirituality. That's an important thread within it. The closing date is September the 1st, so quite soon, but I'm not back from holiday to the 7th, so I'm not going to be looking at anything till the end of that week. So,
but in the meanwhile, we had a session with you and Eve in the beginning of the pandemic, where you talked about engaged ecology, and I really recommend it. It's on our YouTube page, the whole session. So they really talk further about this idea of starting with practice and what they're imagining also for the masters. So I recommend that. Good. Thank you, everyone. It was really nice. I'm going to also upload this session on YouTube. So for those that arrived late, that's also an option. See you soon. Very good to see some familiar faces. And thank you again, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
Sharing your
Thank
wisdom.
you all. Really lovely to see you all. And be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thank you.